You're listening to the Elvis Ultimate Fan Channel podcast, the channel that is devoted 100% to the life and career of the biggest selling recording artist of all time, with your host, Steve Francis.
Yes, welcome once again to another episode from Elvis the Ultimate Fan Channel. My guest today is British writer Ray Connolly. He is best known for his journalism and for writing the screenplays for the films That'll Be the Day and its sequel Stardust, for which he won a Writers Guild of Great Britain Best Screenplay Award. He wrote for the London Evening Standard, where he interviewed many 60s and 70s rock stars and cultural icons, including the Beatles, Muhammad Ali, and of course Elvis Presley. He is the author of the best-selling book Being Elvis, A Lonely Life. Hi Ray, and welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
So a little bit of background then. Your first brush with Elvis would have been August 1969?
That was when I met him. My first brush with him was in, I think, February or March 1956. But when I met him was August 69, in Las Vegas.
Ah, right. So 1956, just explain what you mean by that.
Well, it's hard to explain to people who don't remember, who weren't there. But basically, before Elvis, I mean, John Lennon said this, but before Elvis, there was just popular music, which was Guy Mitchell and Frankie Lane, this sort of people. And suddenly we heard this extraordinary sound, and it was Elvis. It was rock and roll. It was Heartbreak Hotel. And it kind of galvanized, if that's the right word, galvanized a whole generation of boys who were age 15. 15 is very important in these things because that's when you're most impressionable. And if you look through, you see that John Lennon, Bob Dylan, Paul Simon, they were all 15 when Elvis came along. And that's no coincidence, that turned them on to say, there's another way of doing this. And I can't really explain the excitement to hear Heartbreak Hotel and then to buy the next few records. You could hardly afford them, to be honest. They were very expensive. I think they cost 5 and 6 pence. Which was a lot of money in those days.
It would have been, yes.
It's like 26 pence or whatever that is in cents. I don't know, 20 or euros. I don't know. But it was quite. I mean, that would be your entire, more than your entire pocket money for the week,
Yeah.
But it was worth it. It was extraordinary. And suddenly, at the time, my best friend and I would go and find Roman coins. This is a true story. Roman coins in a stream near where we lived in Lancashire. Yeah.
Yeah.
And but when Elvis came, I just forgot the Roman coins completely, and I gave all mine to him. And luckily he married my wife's sister. I mean, it was a small town. I've got that small town, and but Elvis took over completely my life, and in a way, he probably helped shape my life to a large extent because, in those days I had a very bad stammer and I was sort of invisible. I wasn't a great sporting hero at school, but I was the Elvis expert, which was really important. I had something going for me, and that it did actually change my life a bit, I think.
Okay, and then you say the first time you met him though, in the flesh, would have been August 1969.
That was the only time I met him, yes, August 69.
And how did that come about?
Well, great good fortune again. I'd got this fantastic job on the London Evening Standard where I was interviewing rock stars, but other people too, people like James Baldwin and Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier, and but people of cultural interest in the late 60s. I had my own page once a week. And a friend of mine was friendly with Colonel Parker, the aptly named Colonel Parker, and inaptly. And yes. He said, I could get you to him if you can get to Las Vegas. So I said, okay, I'll get there somehow. And I talked my editor into letting me go. And when we got to the hotel in Las Vegas, I was there with Terry O'Neill, famous photographer who died recently, and me and this guy called Chris Hutchins. And we hung around for days waiting to get the call from Elvis. And it sort of went on forever. And then suddenly, about 10:30 one night, in between shows, because he did 2 shows a night, we got a call. You got to go now. And we were in a bar or something, and we flew up to the 15th floor, whatever it was, and go in. And there's Elvis sitting with his Memphis Mafia, the guys, about 5 of them. And interesting thing was, when we walked in, he immediately stood up and greeted us. Yeah. And the other guys sort of looked, said like, "Who are these guys?" Was just really, really unwelcome. But Elvis was very polite, and we all sat down and talked together. Chris Hutchins, Terry O'Neill, me, and the Colonel was on one side watching us the whole time.
Watching you like a hawk, probably.
He just walked, sort of, I felt, at one point I said, kind of rude really, why do you make all those crummy films? Something like that. Maybe I didn't do it crummy, but the idea was there that they were rotten films. And Elvis tried to explain, and I sort of saw the eyes shift to the Colonel, back to me, a couple of times. It was that interesting, that sort of thing, where he knew how rotten they were.
Yes.
And he was embarrassed by them. He said, "I'd be being honest if I didn't admit that. I'd be being dishonest if I didn't admit that they weren't very good." That sort of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
But that's where it was, And so we had about 20 minutes, maybe half an hour, because he was friendly enough. What I remember most about him, though, was he had this. He said he'd never again make a record, he'd sing a song he didn't believe in. Well, he did. He did.
Yeah.
And he'd never again make a movie that he didn't believe in. Well, he never did, because nobody asked him, because he couldn't get any Hollywood films off. And he was going to tour the world. He was going to come to England because he had a lot of fans here and all this sort of stuff.
Well, there was sorry to interrupt you there, Ray,
Yeah,
but
sure.
there was a case, wasn't there, in 1975 when Barbra Streisand offered him the part in A Star Is Born, wasn't there?
Yeah. That was 5 years further on. Yeah, and she got offered the part, and they talked about it, and he was keen. His pal said he was very keen. And then the Colonel Band began putting up reasons why he shouldn't do it. One of which was he wouldn't be the leading artist in it. She would be. And she was producing it, and her boyfriend was directing it, and he'd be, which is all true. And little by little, he kind of, I understand, lost interest a bit. But the Colonel put him off it. Maybe the Colonel had an ulterior motive. Maybe he was thinking, maybe the Colonel thought Elvis was actually just about past it, because by that time he was not in a good state. Now, some of his friends say, well, if he'd done it, he'd have got in a good state.
Well, that's true, yes.
Yeah, because he was very good at sort of, before he did the Aloha from Hawaii thing, he got himself in a good state, did it, and then fell back into the drugs again. So maybe he would have done that. We'll never know. But he turned it down, and Chris Christopherson got the gig, and it's a shame really, because he was better than he knew he was. He could be better. He needed better material, like King Creole, or he needed that stuff if you're going to do it. But I don't know, maybe he wasn't sure of himself either.
Yeah, I always felt he needed a challenge, and when he was faced with a challenge, he would rise to it.
Yeah.
As you say, Aloha and the 1968 what they call the comeback special.
Yeah.
But I think by 1975, Vegas had become a millstone around his neck. That's for sure.
Yeah.
He was bored to death by 1975, I think.
But he must have been, because he was playing doing the same songs, touring America, and the gigs were getting smaller. It wasn't as though he was playing in New York and Los Angeles all the time. He was playing quite small cities, really. And and people would go and see him as though it was like you'd go and see the Empire State Building because you'd seen it.
Yeah.
They weren't all fans. They were the people who, it's Elvis, you've got to go and see Elvis, because he's like the Queen. You've got to go and see the Queen. If she's in town, you're going to go and see her, or whatever, And the important thing to him should have been the music, and it became. But he needed the money always. He had the worst case of talent being misused. You never see a worse one than that, because he always needed money.
Yeah.
Partly because he gave it away a lot, and partly because he got ripped off. all the time,
Apparently, Parker had a terrible gambling habit as well.
Yes, yeah,
He was deep into debt with the hotel.
When he died, he had no money left at all. Parker had, and he must have earned hundreds of millions.
Yes,
it was gone.
Yeah.
And you think this is incredible, and that Elvis trusted him with his career, which is a heartbreaking thing. I mean, the initial deal they did when he got the songwriting thing, the publishing thing.
Yeah.
Elvis Presley Music was a disaster, because it meant he was getting. At first, you'd get good songwriters who'd write for you, but then they were, hang on a sec, why would I do this? Why, if the Colonel had any brains at all, and he didn't not musically, he didn't. It has sort of said in the early 60s, mid 60s, listen, we need some new songwriters, because the songs we're getting aren't very good. They fill the films, 12 songs per film. Why don't we ask all the top songwriters of the time, the Paul Simons, the Lennon McCartneys, to write a song for Elvis? They'd have leapt at it, but they wouldn't have leapt at it if they had to give away half the songwriting publishing to the Colonel and Elvis. They wouldn't have done that, but they were, the thrill of them to John Lennon would have been fantastic.
Yes, yeah. But, I mean, it was all about money for Parker, the now money, as much money and as quickly as he could.
He never understood what he had. He just thought it'll soon end, and make the most, make as much money as we can before it all ends. And of course, he had a lot more than that, but he never really realised it.
Well, it was his carny background, wasn't it? I think that's the reason why he called Elvis at times my attraction.
Yeah,
like he was a sideshow in a carnival.
Yeah, so. Yeah, and his background was really. I mean, the thing about it is it was a Dutch immigrant.
Yes.
When I met him, this was never talked about, but he had this funny accent, and I thought maybe he's one. In Middle America, there are people with slight German accents because of their background. I thought, well, maybe it's that, maybe, and actually, I didn't know he was Dutch. Elvis, I don't think, knew he was Dutch until quite late on. It was an illegal.
Yeah. It's. I lean towards actually Elvis knowing actually.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you the reason why is because in the 60s, the early 60s, did not one of Colonel Parker's brothers come over and visit him in Hollywood when Elvis was working on a movie, and Elvis would have met him. Now, there's that story. Yeah. Now, how true that is, I don't know. But Elvis should have put two and two together there. Maybe Elvis just didn't want to know.
Yeah, well, that's another. Yeah, you had your head in the sand. The other thing is, of course, the Colonel never ever went to Germany. No. When Elvis was in Germany for 2 years, he never saw him. Mm-hmm. You sort of think any other manager would have been out there talking to him, making plans. Yeah. None of that. So he clearly couldn't leave the US because he was scared he wouldn't get back in again.
Whether he gave Elvis some story about there's too much to do while you're away, I've got to be in the States or something like that, I don't know. I think Elvis could have had an inkling that he was an illegal immigrant, but he just didn't want to know.
Well, yeah, probably. Yeah, I don't know. I wasn't there.
No, well, this is it. We're only surmising now. Yeah. Just if we're going back,
the person who should know. I think we should ask Priscilla, because she would know.
Yes, that's right.
Because he would tell her, wouldn't he? He'd say, you know what? He's not even American, that guy. But I don't know. She's never mentioned it either.
No, that's right. That's right. Just if we can go back then to when you were when you were speaking to him in 1969, what was he actually like to meet?
It was actually one thing I remember specifically, because I told you I had a very bad stammer until even then, and he very quickly noticed, you would, and turned to me in a very sort of kind way and spoke quietly to me as though, it's the kind of things people do with stammerers. They sort of make it easy for them, and pay more attention, that sort of thing. So it's that. But he was extremely friendly. He would have talked, all night, but the Colonel didn't want us there all night, and he was also quite honest about, admitting that the films were rubbish and the songs were rubbish. And that, he was friendly enough,
And he was extremely handsome. More so around about this period. I think he went through a period sort of 1968 to 1972 when he was just devastatingly handsome.
Yeah. The funny thing is, I didn't realize when I was 16, 15 that he was handsome. It never entered my mind. But I mean, he wouldn't, but he didn't. And then when I saw him, I thought, crumbs, this guy's a real looker. And, his eyes looked small. I remember that. It was in between shows, so he was wearing makeup. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So his skin was very smooth, and he was wearing a stage suit. He was going to wear it again later, so he didn't take it off between shows, obviously. And it was just very friendly. It wasn't a great interview. In all honesty, it wasn't, because the other guys were sort of chipping in, and it was sort of just friendly guys chatting, really.
Yes.
And him saying obvious things, but it was Elvis, and that was interesting.
And unfortunately, you didn't even get time to take a cassette recorder or a tape recorder in.
No, because we weren't expecting it. And Terry O'Neill, photographer, had his camera in his bedroom. I got my tape recorder in my bedroom, and it never occurred to us that we're going to get called that second, and you'd have to run to the top floor to see him. So we didn't record it and didn't photograph it. Terry got some great shots of Elvis on stage, and that's a kind of regret for me. But there you go.
Yeah.
And at those days, not many people were using cassettes, but I use them all the time here with the Beatles and the Stones and people here. But I didn't use them that big night with Elvis, which is ironic, really.
Yeah. Did you ever get a chance to discuss Elvis with the Beatles, Paul or John, or
with John Lennon all the time?
Yeah.
With John a lot. I mean, John was a big fan. I mean, we'd talk about it, and we'd argue about things we liked, songs we liked, and
well, there's some famous quotes from John, isn't there, about without Elvis there'd have been no Beatles.
Yeah, but that's true. Without Elvis.
And Elvis died when he went into the army, I think was another one.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that, actually. I think he died when he got stuck in Hollywood. Because when he came back from the army and did Elvis Is Back, that was a great album. So he could still do it. It's
yes.
Just the material. He wasn't being given material that he could do anything with. And this great need for money that he had was endlessly making 3 films a year. And as he said, how do you find 12 songs for 3 times a year for an album for these films?
They can't all be good.
Most weren't. Let's face it, most weren't.
I think one of the things that actually sealed his fate in the 60s was Blue Hawaii. The soundtrack album sold more than Elvis Is Back.
I know, too bloody successful, wasn't it?
Yeah. And,
but it had one huge hit. Yeah. Can't Help Falling in Love with You. On that album.
That's right, yeah.
And they didn't put the big hits on Elvis Is Back. They should have put It's Now or Never on. And, I Learned Something Tonight. They didn't do that. And actually, most albums in those days would have Andy Williams sings Can't Get Used to Losing You and 12 other great songs. That would sell the album too. And for some reason, they didn't do that. They kept the singles quite separate, apart from that Blue Hawaii one when wise men say only fools rush in. Well, there was Elvis rushing in,
Yeah. And another couple of things I think sealed his fate was they tried a couple of semi-serious movies, didn't they? Wild in the Country and Flaming Star, and they didn't do as well as the singing ones.
But they did okay.
They did okay, yeah.
So they didn't make the kind of money that the other ones made, and but with a good manager, he'd have realised that he could do 1 film a year, not 3, 1 film a year, and 1 great album a year, and maybe 3 singles. That's what he should have done. And he should have looked at the. He admitted he never read the part. He never read the part. He got the part and was told turn up at a certain time at Burbank Studios, whatever it is, and you're going to be called Steve, or whatever or Ray, or whatever. Yeah. And off you go. And he sort of. But no one ever said, do you like the part, Elvis? It was a commodity. He just did what he was told. instead of sort of saying, I ain't doing this. This is a terrible part. You can't imagine Steve McQueen or Paul Newman, who were stars at the same time, not reading the parts and having the say-so on whether they did it or not. But Elvis had no say-so. The Colonel agreed the film, and that was it. And Elvis had to do it. I mean, it's extraordinary, a man of his ability.
Yes. I mean, I hear fans say to me time after time after time, why didn't he stand up more to Colonel Parker?
I know, and we all think this endlessly, and I'm sure it's a friend of mine in Memphis called Stanley Booth, another writer. He said, Ray, he was just terrified. He'd come from dire poverty, and really poor, and he reckoned that he always thought the Colonel had got him where he was. Without the Colonel, he'd be back where he started. And the Colonel managed to keep him thinking that.
Yes.
And also, the Colonel had realised early on that Elvis liked money. Not for himself, although he did spend massively, but he gave it away. He liked giving money away.
Yes.
And so he had all those people who began living at Graceland in trailer homes and stuff. Relations came up from Mississippi and things. And then he had all the guys who worked for him, you know. They all lived around there, and he kept them all. He didn't need like 10, 12 people on call all the time, but he liked having them around. He liked having his pals around. And I think the Colonel, you know, Elvis paid for everything. And so he needed money to keep that kind of lifestyle. A bit like it being a sort of, being a king. I mean, king, yeah, but being, you know, a kind of king, yeah, of his own little country called Graceland and the people that work there. And he kind of liked it, I think, and he just needed money to give.
His father as well was always terrified of going back to poverty as well, and I think the Colonel played on that as well.
Yeah. Without me, Elvis, you'd be nothing.
Yeah,
you know, and you know, what Elvis didn't realize that he was a star, not the Colonel.
Yeah,
he was a star. He had the talent. Anybody could have. I mean, any decent manager could have run Elvis. It wasn't, once he got started, it wasn't difficult, you know, because he had so many abilities. But the Colonel managed to convince Elvis that it was through him that he became famous. Through him he got on TV. Well, I'm sure he did at first, but the Colonel's abilities ran out very quickly, probably even before he went in the army. The Colonel was of no use after that at all, apart from earning him a lot of money.
Yes. It's been said actually that Gladys didn't trust the Colonel.
No.
And I think the Colonel worked on Vernon to talk her around to sign.
I tell you who else didn't like him, Marion Keisker.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. I interviewed her and she sort of said, well, the Colonel talked him into it or whatever. You know, she was quite dismissive, you know. She was a nice woman, Marion Keisker. She was what I didn't know when I interviewed her, in about 1972 or something, she was living back in Memphis. She'd been having an affair with Sam Phillips.
Yes.
When she'd found Elvis, I just thought she worked for him, but you know, what she did. But she also was having an affair with him, so she was in love with Sam, which I never realised.
Yeah, and I always think that Marion doesn't get the credit she deserves.
No.
She kept at Sam to get Elvis back in, and she kept on and on and on at him. So she never really got the credit that she deserved for that.
No, she didn't, and she knew stuff. You know, she was better educated than most people you would expect. She's like a school teacher, to be honest. Then she went into the army, didn't she? And she met Elvis in Germany.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, but when he met her, she was like a school teacher, and in those days she'd been kind of blonde and glamorous, I suppose. But when I met her, she was a very, very nice lady, you know, and she spoke very kindly of his mum, and those sort of people, and she was admitting that, you know, his mum hadn't had any education and his dad hadn't either. So she kind of understood, but she always spoke of him as being a very, very, very polite, extremely polite young man, you know.
Yes, I've heard that a lot from people who have met him. One funny thing, when he did bump into her in the army, he said, "I don't know whether to kiss you or salute you."
Yeah. great line.
Yeah.
But well, you'd have kissed her because she was very nice.
Tell me about, you actually got to discuss the Elvis shows with Bob Dylan and John Lennon. And what did they want to know about the meeting?
It was bizarre because right after meeting Elvis and seeing the shows about three times, I watched 3 shows, yeah?
Yeah.
And then I was going back to England. I was going through New York because I was flying, yeah. And I stopped off in New York. And Bob Dylan was going to come to the Isle of Wight Pop Festival that summer, a bit later on, but in about a month's time. And I wanted to get to interview him when he got to England. So I called his manager's office and said what I wanted. He said, "Oh, I don't know about that, Ray. Why don't you come over to the office?" So I went round and I explained again that when Bob got to England, could I meet him? He said, "Well, I'm not sure we could do that, but what about talking to him now on the phone?" I said, "Now?" He said, "Yeah." And I thought, oh my God, I haven't got any questions planned. And this is the great Bob Dylan. And I couldn't think of what to say. And so suddenly I said, well, yeah, I suppose so. I think, oh, crumbs. And then suddenly he calls to his secretary, "Jill, would you get Bobby on the phone? Get Bobby back. We want to talk to Ray Connolly from the Evening Standard in London." Anyway, okay. So suddenly this voice says, "Hello," and Bob Dylan. And I'm sort of thinking, I asked some really dumb questions about all this stuff. And then suddenly I said, "Actually, I've just been to see Elvis." He said, "Really?" "Yeah." I said, "What did he sing? What did he play? Were the Jordanaires with him? Did he do the Sun record stuff? Did he do Mystery Train? Did he do That's All Right, Mama? Did he?" And all those questions. Yeah. And was Scotty Moore there? Who was in the band? You know, all these things. And he said, "I read about it in the New York Times, but they didn't give any of the great details, you know, these sort of things." Mm-hmm. Anyway, but all of a sudden we were mates, Bob Dylan and me, because we were talking about the guy we both loved when we were 15, you know?
Yes.
And it was kind of exciting to talk to him, but not as Bob Dylan, but as just Bob, my mate Bob, and me, and you know, both being Elvis fans, yeah? So I hang up, and it was not a bad interview. It wasn't very good, actually. Then I came back to England, and at the time I was seeing a lot of John Lennon for various things. And I rang out one Saturday afternoon, about a week later, and we were talking about whatever we've been doing. And I said, "I've just been to see Elvis." He said, "What, really? What did he play? What did he do?" Yeah, all the same questions that Bob Dylan asked. Exactly. They could have been in league almost, but it was, "Did you do the Sun record stuff? Did you do that's what Bruce Wade chooses? That's All Right, Mama?" "Oh, yeah." So it was real, and I realized at that point that huge superstars are really fans. That's how they start off, and they stay fans all their lives. Yes. It never really goes away.
That's right.
Because they like thinking of themselves how they were when they first heard it and how it changed their lives. And it was astonishing how close the questions were, and it really. You know, John and me are the same age exactly, and it was kind of us both talking about how great it was to be that age and to hear this. And it does change. It changed my life. It changed John's life. It changed Bob Dylan's life. You know, yeah.
One of my favorite things I've ever heard Bob say about Elvis was somebody asked him once what was the highlight of his career, and he said, "When I heard that Elvis had recorded one of my songs."
Well, I can understand that, you know.
It was "Tomorrow Is a Long Time."
And didn't Elvis do a great job on it, you know? I mean, yes. He did a really, really good job. I think he copied, the accompaniment was copied off Odetta, yeah?
Yes, yeah, I think you're right.
I think that's where that came from. But that's where he heard the song. I think Odetta had a thing. Odetta sings Bob Dylan, and he liked that one. And at the time, he only recorded mainly songs written especially for him, you know, by people that worked for, you know, Elvis Presley Music, whatever they were, these writers. Mm-hmm. But suddenly he did that. And at the same session, he did that Hawaiian song, "I Remember You." And he did Down in the Alley.
That's right. That's right. And later he did "Don't Think Twice, It's All Right."
Which I've always liked, and people say too, it is a lot faster, but because he was just warming up.
He was. It was more. It was more of a studio jam, and they just happened to turn the tape on, because there's a big long take available on an album I have, and it goes on for something like 8 or 9 minutes, but it was edited down to 2.5 minutes for release.
Yeah, and he didn't really know all the words either. He just came singing the same bit.
he was definitely freewheeling it, that's for sure.
Yeah, but at the same time, it was far better than any of the other songs recorded at that session. I think.
Yes.
But because he liked the song and he wanted to do it, and he just enjoyed singing it, and that's so important with these people.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, again, it was down to him believing in the song.
Yeah. It's just a really shame that he didn't sort of say, listen, why don't I do a few more of these and record them properly, and we'll sit down and work out how we're going to do them, instead of them all joining in and singing it. Do we not use the singing one? It would be fantastic. And that's why you sort of think that if he'd had more confidence in himself, he'd have insisted. He'd have said, listen, I like these things. I'm going to do them. I think towards the end of his career, he was doing just what he wanted pretty well, because they had to go along with it because he wouldn't do anything else. So you got to do better tracks. But
the number of times that he went against Parker was the 1968 comeback special.
Yes,
Parker just wanted 30 Christmas songs, and then that was it. And he went against it. Another time was Chips Moman in the Memphis studios. He went against the Colonel, didn't he?
Yeah.
So if only he just stood up to the Colonel a bit more. Well,
except that Chips Moman never ever got to record him ever again.
That's right.
And also the guy that Elvis talked to, what was the guy's name who did the 68 special? Because I spoke to him. Yeah.
Oh, Steve Binder.
Steve Binder was telling me how when he and Elvis are working together, and Elvis said, well, listen, maybe we can do something else together later on, you and me, after this. Steve said, yeah, great. But Steve never got the chance, He rang up and didn't get... Elvis even gave him his own phone number, but when Steve rang him, he got somebody else and was fobbed off, I thought, oh, blow it,
And also, Steve tells a story of when he turned up at Elvis's dressing room. It was probably the 1969 comeback, and again, he wasn't let in.
No.
I'm not even convinced that Elvis knew he was there to see him, because I don't think Elvis would have turned Steve away.
He wouldn't have turned so many people away. He just never knew. There were blocks. There were blocks all around him. The Colonel was making sure that no one got too close to him. I talked to Mike Stoller, Lieber Stoller.
I do.
And this was probably 20 years ago. I talked to Mike in New York, and he was saying that the Colonel sent him a contract. They were going to write a lot more for Elvis, and it was a blank sheet of paper. And he said, just sign it. And he said, what do you mean, just sign it? And he said, well, sign it, and I'll fill in the details later.
Yeah.
And they thought, no way, we're not complete idiots.
Yeah.
And so they never wrote another song for Elvis. Elvis recorded a few more songs they'd written, because they'd have been on like Girls, Girls, Girls and things. They'd have been on. But what a waste, And my friend Mort Schumann, who was a big friend of mine and lived in England for a while, we worked together on things that never got off. But he raised the latest flame, and Morty said, we never got a phone call from Elvis. The only time he got a call was they were recording his latest flame, and they couldn't quite get the beat right. Ding, 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 that one.
Yeah.
And it's really Bo Diddley, isn't it? But and he said, I played it on the piano down the phone to them and explained ding, 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 ding. Anyway, which is bizarre because they were all top musicians. But he said, but Elvis never ever got in touch with us, and they'd have been thrilled to speak to him. But I think there was a wall around him. There was a wall right around Elvis the whole time.
Yes, yeah. He was a snowman, wasn't he? Which is like a snow job where they just batter you with the snow, like the Snowman's League. He always said he had a club called the Snowman's League, didn't he? Yeah. And people could get a handbook, a Snowman's League handbook, and when you opened it, the pages were just blank.
Yeah. I had breakfast with him one morning in Las Vegas, and I never forgot. And at the end of it, the bill comes, and he says, well, I won't humiliate you by paying for your breakfast or whatever. Or I won't compromise you by paying for your breakfast, and just walked away. So I paid for both of our breakfasts. I thought, what a cheap. I don't know. He thought it was funny, but I just thought, yeah.
I know he loved the freeload. I've heard that he loved the freeload. Yeah. I could say a lot more, but
he was a monster.
Yeah,
a total monster.
Do you know the writer Alana Nash?
I've spoken to her on the phone, and we've been in touch, but I don't know her. But I know that she wrote a book about the Colonel, and they were going to film it, and now they're making another film that she didn't write.
That's right.
And that she's really upset now. She wrote to me and said how upset she was.
I'm hoping to speak to Alana in a few weeks, actually. She's offered to come on. Because, she did Elvis and the Colonel, but she also did Revelations from the Memphis Mafia as well, which is Billy Smith and Marty Lacker. And Lamar Fike. It's almost like an Elvis Bible, actually. You know, anything you want to know, you can refer to that.
Yeah. Oh, she's excellent. She's really excellent.
I would agree. But she said something about Parker. He always liked to keep you on your toes, keep you guessing about him. He could never be straight. He could never give you a straight answer.
Yeah.
So
I just think he was a horrible man, in all honesty. In fact, Alana asked me, what did I think of him? And I said, I didn't like him.
Yeah.
She said, no, I didn't either. But
I think he strangled Elvis artistically, especially in the 60s movies. It was just for now money. That's all it was, for now money.
Yeah. Just do it now, and let's get the money and get out before before people lose interest. But people never lost interest. No. He didn't get it. He didn't understand that this fella had something extraordinary.
He did. I agree.
I've often wondered what it was exactly about the voice that was extraordinary. And I kind of think it's like the Voice of America, in that he could sing anything. He could sing anything, and it worked. He didn't do swing, but it could be blues or country or mock opera or whatever, or ballads or anything. And there must be something in the voice that is kind of, it gets through to the listener. He used to say he would study the lyrics very, very carefully, and he would underline during the recording sessions the words that he thought were really important. Mm-hmm. And this is what real artists do. I think Frank Sinatra does the same thing. They'd say, I've got to get this emotion across at this point, and this makes a difference to the song. It isn't just a guy with a good voice singing it. It's a guy with a voice that can get through to people. And Elvis did that par excellence.
It's always amazed me the fascination and the draw that people still have with Elvis, and it'll be 43 years this August, I think, since he passed, and he's still gaining new fans to this day. Yeah,
because he could do it. That helps, But some of the records I really, I very rarely play the records, to be honest. But I like some of those things like. Anything That's Part of You. That's such a moving record, much a moving song. It's a great song written by Bob Robertson?
I think it probably was. Yeah. Don Robertson. I think it is.
Don. No, it was Bob. It wasn't Don.
Oh, it was Bob. Was it? Oh, right.
Bob's the guy that worked with Bob Dylan.
Ah, right. And there was another one as well. There's Always Me. That's another great ballad as well.
Yeah. That period was actually, although John Lennon said Elvis was dead then, he wasn't. He was doing some good stuff, but not as consistently as he'd done it earlier,
Yes. How do you feel about the last few years of Elvis's life? I'm sure you watched it the same as everybody else. You saw the very fast decline after about 73, 74. Yeah. It was, a guy, I did a documentary on James Dean once, and he said, well, it was good that James Dean died so young, because in truth, he couldn't let you down, he couldn't let you down. And in a way, when Elvis died, he couldn't let us down anymore, because he let us down so much. But now and again, I played The Last Farewell the other day. I thought, how well he sang it on that final album. I think it was the last album, Yes.
And he sang it really well. And you sort of think, why couldn't he do this more often? Why couldn't he actually? But of course he wasn't. He was, stupor a lot of the time. And he'd lost interest in his career, he'd lost interest in everything, dating a girl who was like 18 or something,
Yes.
with whom he had nothing in common. And there's a kind of prison about being that gigantically famous. But it's like I said before, but he was famous for who he was, not for what he was doing anymore. I'm sure a lot of those fans didn't really know about Mystery Train and I'm Right, You're Left, She's Gone. They weren't interested in that. They're just seeing Elvis on stage, and it's like sort of saying, and I think he never realized himself how good he was. He didn't know how good he was. He didn't know what he had. He didn't know the abilities he had, and that's kind of sad. I think he was incredibly sad the last 3 years of his life.
Yes, I think you're probably right. You can tell just by looking at him that he was deeply unhappy. He was depressed. I believe he was depressed.
Yeah.
They couldn't get him into a recording studio. They had to take the recording studio to him, because you mentioned there the last album that was actually recorded in the Jungle Room in Graceland, wasn't it?
Yep. And it was all right, but there was I think the other song I quite liked on that one was that the late great, what was it? What's his name? Forever, my darling, I love.
Oh yes, Pledging My Love. Yes, that's a good one. Yeah.
The late great Johnny. Who was it? Who first sang that?
I'm not too sure. I can't remember.
It'll come in a minute if I keep talking.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was one. The interesting thing about a lot of those things were the best ones on those late albums were songs he dug out from his childhood, virtually from his early teens, and Shake a Hand. There's another one. That they're sort of bluesy things that he just liked to do, and I kind of like them, but sad, isn't it? It's really sad.
If I was to ask you one question, what killed Elvis Presley? What would you say?
Outrageous fame.
I think it was a combination of things. I mean, first of all, his unique and utter lifestyle that he had to endure. There was no roadmap. There was no blueprint for what he had to go through.
No. Well, he was really the first rock star. I mean, he was.
That's right.
There'd been nothing like that before him. So there were no rules. And he made it up as he went along. And he made it up, in many ways, very badly for a lot of his career, from like 61 to 68 in films. He was terrible. I mean, he threw away all his abilities. And you think, when the Beatles met him, they always talk about how, I think, they said, why don't you do things like My Baby Left Me, as some rock and roll thing? He said, well, maybe I will next time. And John Lennon said, well, if you do, we'll buy them.
Yes.
And he said the same to me, because I said my favorite is Elvis Is Back. And he said that, we like that too. Maybe we'll do another one like that. But I don't think he ever did, at that time.
So apart from just the unique lifestyle that he lived, I would think also boredom killed him.
Yeah, bored with being Elvis.
Yeah. Because did he not say that at one time, I'm so tired of being Elvis?
Yes, yeah. Which you can understand, because you don't get when you're Elvis, the only people who act normally to you are your family, and even they don't act that normally to you, because you're the provider of everything. So
I always say as well, I think his life would have turned out completely and utterly different had Gladys survived.
Oh yeah. One interesting thing, I always liked the story about the maid who he'd sing hymns with. There was
Yes.
It's always kind of interesting how in those southern towns, on the very rich, you always have black maids. Yeah.
Yes.
And he'd sit at the piano and play whatever they were, and the maid there would sing along with him. And it's kind of, he'd say, "Come and sing with me," and it's people like that he would feel much more comfortable with than the fans harping around, and all the girls who were sort of hanging about. You always get those girls, but he was probably more comfortable in those sort of situations when He was just an ordinary person wanting to sing.
He didn't like to mix with the Hollywood crowd. He was never big into the Hollywood crowd, even when he was making movies in the 60s. He just had no time for it.
But also, they didn't encourage it. He didn't know any film directors or any film writers or anybody. So when he thought about leaving the Colonel, he thought, well, how will I get jobs? He had no idea. And that's kind of bizarre, because most people who work in films, you get to know the directors and writers and, have relationships. He never did.
Well, again, that was Parker not wanting him to know and make friends.
Because, there were quite intelligent, bright, funny, witty, amusing people to hang out with, but he never did. So as soon as they finished, he'd get back in his car and go back to his own mates and things, which is, in a way, laudable in one sense, but you're missing out on an awful lot,
Yes, yeah. Did you, or have you ever been to Graceland?
Yeah. I went on the tour, went there, and...
Have you been recently?
No, this is probably about, 15 years ago.
Right.
I can't remember.
I was there myself in 2002. But there's been sweeping changes recently, hasn't there? They've rebuilt a lot of the complex over the road, and they've also built a guest house as well. Yeah.
It was hideous. I mean, what I was amazed at when I got there was it's on such a busy road. Of course, when he bought it, it was way out of town.
Yes.
Of course, Memphis, like everything else in the world, has got bigger and bigger and bigger. And there are gas stations just down the road, and there are lots of shops selling Elvis junk, and all that sort of thing. And he must have looked out the window and thought that this wasn't how I imagined it when I first bought it. But, it was his home.
That's right. Well, he bought it for his mother and father, and there's questions about, had Elvis lived, would he have sold Graceland and all that? But I don't think he would have, because, like I say, he bought it for his mother.
But the awful thing was that it was had a big upkeep for all that. But I mean, the people who lived there, a lot of people lived there, and of course, when he died, some of them had to leave, because they had either in little homes or trailer homes there, and they had to go, and they just got kicked out, which Elvis wouldn't have done. He would have never had that kind of nerve to be so cruel. I mean, quite cruel to sort of say, because these people, their lives were Elvis. They had nothing else. They were not highly educated, didn't have any other good jobs or great skills or things they could do. He'd have been their meal ticket, and of course they were devoted. But of course, when he died, they were all kicked out.
Yeah, I remember Lamar Fike, one of his friends, said he didn't know what to do with himself for years after Elvis died. He just, because he had no other, he just didn't, there was nothing else for him to do.
No, well, they hadn't had to even learn how to do anything, because, they joined Elvis very early on in their careers, and they hadn't learned how to be top engineers or whatever,
I know Lamar was very, very bitter about Elvis's death.
Yes,
because he was an advanced man, and he was actually in Portland, Maine, where Elvis was supposed to start the tour the day after the 16th, on the 17th of August, and when the Colonel broke the news to Lamar, he said, "Well, you finally did it, didn't you? You worked him into the ground."
Yeah.
So he was very bitter. Yeah, he did. Yeah.
But it's when you look at that, finding Elvis in concert and the film that the CBS were doing at the time, you think, this man should be in the hospital. He shouldn't be on tour. I mean, he just looked terrible, and it's heartbreaking to see someone who 5 years earlier had been so gifted and handsome and enjoying his work, or 6 years earlier maybe, or when I met him 7 years earlier, whatever. And suddenly he's just blown up, and he's sweating, and he's struggling.
Todd Slaughter, who ran the UK fan club, he met him in Indianapolis, didn't he, before the very final concert, to give him a trophy, and he was also presented with a record for the pressings of Moody Blue.
Oh yeah.
And Todd got a good close look at him, and he said he wasn't well at all. He didn't look well at all.
No. And you sort of think, if a man is if you're a manager and a guy is so ill, what are you doing? sending him out on tour looking like that. And anyway, we can't change anything.
No, we can't. Sadly, we can't. We often wish we had a time machine where we could go back and warn Elvis, but would he have listened? Probably not.
Well, not to us, but he may have listened to somebody else.
What
he needed was actually, instead of that sort of string of young women, someone his own age who could talk to him, you know. But I guess it's impossible for those sort of things. I think I've been around rock and roll a lot, you know, and it's very hard for them to get someone who isn't a fan or isn't in it for the money hanging around with you, you know, and it really is. I just think that they never know. You never know, is it me she likes really, or is it because I'm this famous superstar and I got this lovely voice or whatever? They never know.
Yes, that's right.
That's why Linda McCartney, you know, she really did love Paul, and she just did, you know. And I'm sure he's a difficult man to live with sometimes, but he was, and you know, anyway.
Are you ever in touch with Paul these days or not?
No. He was very kind. I think for my Elvis book, he put a thing on the front, sort of saying how important Elvis was. But no, I don't make any attempt to be honest, to be in touch with any of them, because you know that was a job. I was doing a job.
Yes.
And although I was a fan, when I was in America with John Lennon quite a lot, he'd always say, he'd introduce me as, oh, this is Ray, he's a friend of ours from England. I'd never say I was a friend of John Lennon's. He would. I'd never say that, because I always think that, well, yeah, I was a friend. We're very friendly and we're very pally over several years and talk on the phone a lot and all these things. But at the end of the day, he's a world superstar and I'm a journalist. And he didn't know my family like I knew his, right? Mm-hmm. He'd say, why didn't you bring your wife? But he didn't know her name, you know. Well, I knew his wife and I knew his son and his former wife, you know.
Yes.
And it's not the same. And you have to remember that when you're a journalist.
Yeah.
So when I read about things, I mean, the Daily Mail would put in you know, this Ray Connolly, who was a friend of the Beatles. Well, I was on good friendly terms with them, but I wasn't a bosom friend, you know. Yeah. They'd ring me when they wanted something. I mean, Paul rang me and John would ring me when they had something they wanted to say, and I'd spend time with them, and we'd then talk about whatever, mainly about rock and roll or whatever. But I wouldn't turn to them and say, listen, I've got a problem, can you help me? No, I would with a friend.
Now, for people that don't know, you've actually written a few books connected with the Beatles or John Lennon. There's Sorry Boys, You Failed the Audition. Being John Lennon, A Restless Life, and then also Ray Connolly, Beatles Archive. Yeah.
And
tell me about Sorry Boys, You Failed the Audition. That's a very interesting title.
Well, yeah, I always liked the road not travel theory of life. You know, we all have choices in our lives. Things happen, or we go one way, or we go another way. And I thought, what would have happened to the Beatles if George Martin had turned them down in 1962? If they hadn't recorded "Love Me Do," if he said, "Sorry, boys, you failed the audition," and I thought, well, I'm going to give them different lives. So I wrote it's a novella. It's only like 25,000 words long. And I invented their lives, and I saw it all through the eyes of their fan club secretary, a girl called Frida, who I'm still friendly with. And I sort of, you know, Paul would have gone to college, obviously, and done English, but he was always going to be a singer. He's always going to be a songwriter. John would have been a sort of bohemian in Liverpool for a bit. And I think George would have been a sort of guitarist who was for hire, probably. Ringo would have won the pools because he was always lucky. And I thought, well, I'll write a story about that, and I'll work out how Frida, the secretary, can't give up on the idea that they could have been something. They could have been contenders. They could have been famous. So, and then you have to read the story to find out what happens. But basically, that's what it was. And it was. I'm really proud of it. I wanted it to be it was a radio play on BBC for a while. It's been on several times actually, and I was hoping it would be a stage show, It's not happened yet because it's very hard to get rights to some of the music. Very expensive. But, it isn't all over yet. That's that one.
And then there was Being John Lennon, A Restless Life.
I did one first on Elvis being...
Yeah, that's right. I was going to come to that. Yeah, Being Elvis, A Lonely Life. Yeah.
And then A Restless Life. I wanted... Well, when you spend a lot of time with people, you get to know them pretty well. And I always thought after John died, and I was going to go and see John the day he died, so it's one of those things, but, I didn't. I always felt unhappy about the way he was being portrayed, the way he became a saint, the way Yoko turned John into a martyr and a saint and all that. And I thought, well, John wasn't a saint. John was a miserable bugger sometimes. It'd be very cruel and all these other things. But, I liked him because, we got on really well. And I wanted to be honest about him. And I thought always that John was jealous of Paul. I always did. So I wanted to write as honest a book as I could about John, and I did, I think. I mean, I was quite proud of how honest I was. Some people thought I was a bit unkind on him. I wasn't, because I was very fond of him, but I had to be honest, because otherwise there's no point in it. So, and some of the other books, I've read quite a few of them, but I thought, well, that wasn't really John, It wasn't much like John. John wasn't like that, Anyway, so I did that.
So we just touched on that as well. You, before the John Lennon book, you did Being Elvis, A Lonely Life. But we probably covered most of the topics that in that anyway. Yeah,
I think Great Fame is and for him, incredibly lonely. Because before, the Beatles, John said this actually, there were four of us, there were four Beatles, but Elvis was on his own. Must have been murder. And John said that. And I thought, yes, it's true. And it's an incredibly lonely life because you've no one to share it with. You're the only one. You've got to get up there on stage by yourself. Murder, And
so just away from the Elvis topic, for people that don't know, you also wrote the screenplays for the films That'll Be the Day and the sequel Stardust, starring David Essex.
Yeah, yes, that was another lucky break for me. David Putnam, the producer, was my good friend at the time, and I went to borrow a book from David Putnam on Elvis, the Jerry Hopkins biography, yeah. And while I was there, David said, I got the book because he'd bought one in New York and he got an early one, and he said, "What else are you doing?" I said, "Well, I don't know." He said, "Well, do you want to write a film for me?" And that day we sort of sat down together and we planned That'll Be the Day. So it was over a cup of tea or several cups of tea and a lot of biscuits in his dining room. And then for the next few months he'd come around to my house every day. And I wrote this screenplay about this guy who's really very, very, he's totally selfish. The David Essex character is really selfish. And we thought, to get this film made, you've got to find someone who is really very likable. And then David Putnam went to see Godspell in the West End in London, and he phoned me and said, "I think we found our boy. This guy, David Essex, is so good looking that people will forgive him anything." So that's how David Essex got into That'll Be the Day. And then that came out and it was made and was successful. And we had Ringo in it, and Billy Fury and other people. And then David said, "We should do a sequel." And I said, "Well, it is now, yeah. It was on the way of coming out." And he said, "No, they'll be demanding a sequel when they see it." So I thought, well, maybe they will, maybe they won't, but they were actually. And so we then planned Stardust, which is a different kind of film because it's about a rock star. And at the time, a lot of people, I was writing for the Evening Standard, a lot of people were dying. Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, of drug overdoses. And it kind of seemed that I had to end it on a downer. And at the end of the film, David Essex' character overdoses. And people said, this is going to sort of, it's really a downer ending. Will it kill the film? Well, it didn't, because people liked it, actually. And it was, at the same time, it was David Putnam and me who had young families at the time. And we were both very anti-drugs, and always were, and I still am. Yes. And so is he. And I wanted the message to get across that, drugs kill. And and I'd written so many obituaries and of people whom I knew, and so I was quite pleased to get that in, and it was another big hit. So that was nice for me, and nice for David Putnam too. That made his career, started his career going, and helped me no end.
Well, That'll Be the Day is one of my favourite films. I have to watch it at least once a year because I think it's such a great film.
It's back on DVD.
Right. For anybody that's interested, That'll Be the Day is back on DVD.
And
and also, if anybody is interested, the book that Ray has written called Being Elvis: A Lonely Life is available on Amazon and in all good bookshops.
But the one you should get is Sorry Boys, You Failed the Audition, because I think people will really like that one.